Hey friend, in this video, I am answering probably the biggest question I get asked is, how do you set up your palette? So if you're ready to see how I set up my palette, the order I put the colors in, why I put them in that order, and how to prep your palette so it doesn't bead up and get all weird, then this video is for you. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how I set up my palette using the 12 colors that I use from Winsor & Newton. This can be done in the same order or arrangement using a different brand of paint or different colors. These are the colors that I've used for over 7 years now, and I love them. I won't change it up because I love them too much. And one of the biggest questions I get asked about my paint is why I use professional level versus Cotman or student level paint. And one of the main reasons is for the integrity of the pigment and how it mixes using wet and wet technique. Since I paint a lot of loose florals or loose landscapes, I use a lot of wet and wet technique. And professional level just spreads and blends really nicely. It's just a higher quality, so you're gonna have higher quality results. But that doesn't mean that you can't use student grade level paint and have good results or even the same results. Different artists will prefer different brands of paint, different versions of paint, or different pigments even. So it's totally up to you and your style. Try them both out. But this is a traveler's palette that folds up, and a lot of people ask what this little opening is for. It's for if you're standing and painting, you can put your thumb in there and hold your palette. But this palette is perfect. The perfect size. I've had this one for many, many years. We can't find the direct link for this palette anymore. I don't think it's sold anymore. But I only use 12 pigments anyway, and this has 12 dishes for 12 pigments, and then it has the big 5 mixing wells where you're gonna mix up secondary colors and tertiary colors. My palette has 12 colors in it that I use as well. There's colors in here that I have had in here for many, many years and I never use. And then I have yellow, the same yellow in here 4 times. So it takes up a lot of extra dishes. But these are the only colors I use. I don't buy anything else, mainly because I just don't think about it, but I just really love these colors and I can mix up secondary colors in my mixing wells. And so one of the biggest questions I get asked is how do I set up a brand new palette? What order do I put in my colors, etc. I always put my colors in order of the rainbow. I start with black and brown first, so we'll put black and brown here, and then I just follow Roy G. Biv. And because I don't just have one orange or one yellow, I'm going in order from Scarlet Lake, following black, brown, Scarlet Lake, Opera Rose, Cadmium Orange, Yellow Ochre, Lemon Yellow Deep, Permanent Sap Green, Prussian Blue, Cobalt Blue, Phthalo Turquoise, and then Ultramarine Violet. That way, if for some reason any of my dishes with colors get mixed together, they're at least separated by warm and cool colors, so I'm not gonna get too much brown or muddy color mixed in there. But because I'm ordering pigment straight from the tube, I usually don't paint with wet paint. So unless I'm doing a really large scale painting that needs a lot of saturated color, then I'll use paint straight from the tube. But whenever I need to refill a dish or I'm starting a palette from scratch, I will always set out my paint to dry for at least a day. If you're impatient, you can work with this paint wet. I would just recommend starting slow because a little bit of pigment goes a really long way. But I put a really good size amount of paint in there. About half of this 5 milliliter tube goes inside of these dishes. And the reason why I paint with dried paint, so I wait for these to dry so they become hard, is because the pigment still stays very saturated when you're working with dry pigment like this. And you don't really waste that much paint. When you are working directly from the tube and it's wet like this, most people slop up too much of the paint on their brush and tend to waste paint by rinsing it off in their water cups, or at the end of the day, they realize they squeezed out too much and they don't use all of their color in their dish. So I prefer painting once these colors are dry so that I don't waste paint, and the colors are still very vibrant, very easy to use, and it's a totally normal thing to do with watercolor. Now, if you're painting with acrylic paint, that's a very different story, or gouache or something like that. But with watercolor, it's totally normal to wait for things to dry, your pigment to dry, and then to use it as dried pigment. So we've got our yellow, so we're going through warm colors and now starting to switch over to our cool colors. If you have a bigger palette, I'd recommend squeezing out in one of your extra dishes, squeezing out another dish of yellow. That is probably the most used color, is this lemon yellow deep. That's why I have it 4 times in this palette. But obviously if you have this palette, then you'll just have to refill it once it gets empty. Like I need to refill Prussian blue right here, and probably cobalt blue soon. So here's Prussian blue. And then another thing that I do is I'll have these 2 mixing wells reserved for when I mix up cool colors, and then these are for my warm colors. Like you can see in my main palette over here, I mix up my blues, blue greens, yellow greens, all of that over here. And then anything that's mixed up with pinks and reds, oranges, etc. is gonna be over here. Because when you mix warm and cool colors, you're gonna get really muddy colors, really brown pigments. And I want to make sure that my pigments stay really saturated and vibrant and clean. So I keep them separate so we don't make brown. Because contrasting colors make brown, and contrasting color combos always include 1 warm color and 1 cool color. For example, blue and orange are contrasting colors. Orange is warm, blue is cool. That makes brown. Red and green. Red is a warm color, green is a cool color, etc. This is phthalo turquoise. It looks much darker when it's wet than when it actually gets used on paper. And ultramarine violet. Purple is my least favorite color, so this color gets put last. And I don't use it that much. So there you go. Now your palette is all prepped and ready. If you have a plastic palette like this, one thing I do recommend, or at least something to keep in mind, is that once you do start adding pigment into these bigger mixing wells with water, you're gonna start to notice some beading happening, some pigment kind of wicking away. And that is because of this waxy coating on the plastic, which will wear off after a few uses. But if it's not wearing off, or if it's bothering you, you can take a glue stick and rub it all over the bigger mixing wells and then smudge it around with a paper towel and basically pick up the rest of the remainder of the glue stick. And I don't know how it works, but it works, and it stops the bleeding or the beading from happening if that is bothering you. I hope that video was helpful for you. If you still have questions on palette setup stuff, or maybe further questions palette related, drop them in the comments below. Again, we have all of the supplies that I use in my palette, all the pigments I use in my palette, linked in the description of this video. Make sure to check it out, along with all of the tutorials that we have on this channel, because there's some mighty good ones, if I do say so myself. Until next time. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.